Okay, so welcome to the instrument editor. You will recognise bits and pieces, mate, from the good old TTRAK 2K, or whatever it was called, 2K4. Yeah, so starting here, obviously this is where you choose your instrument. It struck me that I haven't actually got a keyboard shortcut to go up and down through the instrument, so that's probably something that I might want to do. But basically, all these bits and pieces here are your classic kind of instrument level settings. So whatever instrument I'm on here, these values here on this left hand side all relate to it at an instrument level. So the volume of the instrument, self-explanatory. Like I said before, 0 is basically loud and F is really, really quiet. This is where you set the speed of the playback of the amplitude envelope here, as you remember. Again, the lower the number, the faster that it moves through these steps. Here's where you set the timer type. If you define any timers in any of these steps along here, then here's where you'll do that. Here's where you select the buzzer type. Again, these tooltips are quite handy to remind you what's what. So if you have any of these steps where you set a buzzer, then you need to give it an associated buzzer type. And here's another feature called analog, which we'll get into later. But it's a modulation effect that adds a bit of non-linearity to the pitch. But I'll explain that in a little bit. Here's where you set another modulation or another value, which is a fixed frequency for the instrument, a detune. I'm going to talk about these in more detail in a bit. But let's look at this, right? So this, you probably remember this, which is where in your classic tracker view, you draw a waveform envelope. Now, you didn't see it there, but essentially, there's two buttons of interest. I'm just going to turn off the tooltips. So here is the sequence length, right? So at any point, if I want to make the sequence shorter, I can just pull that back in, or I can actually pull that out, right? And try not to do that, which is a little bit annoying. So yeah, I can sort of make the sequence longer and shorter there. If I just draw beyond the end of the sequence, it will extend it for me, so you don't have to worry too much about that. I can also use these buttons up here that will make the sequence longer. So you know exactly what this is. So if I was to play this now, well, actually, before I do it, what I've added is this notion of a loop, right? So you can actually, it will play through that waveform sequence, and then it will bounce back to the loop point, which here is set to the start of the waveform sequence, right? You probably don't want that a lot of the time, so your conventional setting would be you'd set your loop point at the last step, and it will just sit there. So now if I play that, there it is. Super snappy because it's a 200 hertz instrument and it's got the fastest possible speed. So if we just want to slow that down a bit, there it is. Okay, so this is all fairly classical triplex stuff. Let me just show you how this loop thing works, right? So what you could do is something like this. Just have a little bit at the end there, and then you can set up a loop point. You can hear that it's just looping through those last four steps. Yeah? So without loop. So yeah, I don't use it very much, but there's some options there. When you're testing out your instruments, if you just want to silence it, just press enter, and that'll just kill the sound. So I don't know how much you remember about these top bits, T and MB. The idea is that for every step, you can apply a timer, noise, mute, or buzzer, or everything, which may or may not work, to each step. Let's just do that really quickly. If you remember, classically, if you want to do any sort of timer effect, you have to plop a timer there, a timer step up here. And then the other thing you need to do is basically assign a timer value. So if you give it a timer, then that's interesting. So yeah, I forgot how I'd done it, but if you give it a timer step and you don't have a timer value selected, you'll hear nothing, right? So, but in this instance, this single step instrument, just a straight square wave. And if I apply timer 1 to it, which if I look at my tooltip, it's a SID, and then I give it a timer step, there's your SID. Yeah? So I turn that off. And if you remember here, if you want to apply noise at any step, you drop a noise. So if you want to hear noise, you put a noise mark here on the step in question, right? And the second thing to do with noise you need a noise sequence to go with it. And if you remember, this is very similar to the original triplex. This is a little bit different. Essentially, the first cell here is the speed of the sequence. We're just going to have a single value sequence, right? But you could have, like a 14-step sequence or whatever I've got there. Essentially, the next values are frequencies from 0 to what is it? Let's have a look. Just enter that, come out of there. So 0 to 1F. So 0 is a sort of high-pitched noise and 1F is a low-frequency noise. At 20, which is set to by default, is mute. So let's just put it to 0. And then to finish a sequence off, you put an F. And then what you can do is if you put F0, well, actually, essentially what it does is it will always loop to the position. So F0 will loop back to position 0 in the sequence. So the idea is you could have a sort of a 14-step noise sequence, which you would then loop all the way back to the start. But you might not want to. You might want to just make it loop on the last step, much like here, where it loops on the last step. It doesn't loop, it just sticks on the last step. Anyway, we've got a sequence there with noise, and then you can hear the noise. If you want to hear what, in fact, this just to quickly show this next one as well, the mute step. If you want to mute the square, which you might want to do for a variety of reasons, you drop the mute there. And that's muting the square, and you can hear that noise over the top a lot easier. One really useful feature is the slow-mo mode, and you can use this in either the song editor or the instrument editor. If you want to hear what your instrument's doing, you can put it into this slow-mo mode, and you can hear the instrument really, really carefully. So if you make some fucked up, freaky instrument, then you can engage slow-mo, and you can hear the really fine details. So it's really cool. You can use slow-mo in your song editor screen, in your pattern editor screen, here, for the same reason. If you're like dialing in pitch bends and stuff like that, you can just hit slow-mo and you can really get into the detail. But in here, I'm going to go click it here. Alternatively, you can just go Control Z, which is slow-mo, and then you'll hear that instrument in slow motion. So that's handy. Okay, so that's the mute and the noise. And then the final one here, which is just like triplex, is your buzzer. So if we just make a single step instrument, engage the buzzer here, let's mute the square wave, and we don't hear anything. That's because to hear a buzzer, you need to give it a buzzer wave. So there's some options that might make sense. Let's just put that up to 8. And there they are. Okay, so if you want a buzz step, you've got to give it both a buzzer step here up at the top, and you want to give it a buzzer value here. And that is the classic TNMB setup.